Dark Secrets of the American Frontier. In less than 70 years, the U.S. went from those mere 300,000 square miles occupied by the original 13 colonies to taking control of the entire continental U.S. we're familiar with today. They grabbed a staggering 2.8 million square miles of land. It's truly mind-blowing and one of the most massive and rapid land acquisitions ever seen in history. Living on the American frontier back then was no easy feat, because the events that unfolded during this time were not for the faint-hearted. There was almost constant warfare, and the terrain was often unforgiving and challenging to navigate. You had to be a special kind of crazy to survive and thrive on the frontier. And if you were not strong enough, then be prepared to meet a quick end. From the sad story of Daniel Boone to the untimely and harsh death of Davy Crockett, let's delve into the dark secrets of life on the American frontier. Daniel Boone. Daniel Boone was one of the incredible men on the American frontier. He played a major role in opening up the American frontier during the Revolutionary War. During that time, he stumbled upon the Cumberland paths leading into Kentucky, and didn't waste a second. He set the wilderness road on fire and cleared the path. But Daniel Boone wasn't just some ordinary explorer. In 1776, Boone had established the town of Boonesboro a year earlier, right in the midst of the Revolutionary War. Things were getting intense. In July of that year, Boone's daughter, Jemima, who was only 14 then, was with two other young women named Betsy and Fanny Calloway. One day, while out in the fields, a group of Shawnee warriors sent by the British to harass the American settlers in Kentucky captured them. When the residents of a Shawnee village found out about it, they didn't waste any time and immediately set out to pursue the kidnapper. They tracked them all the way to the Shawnee village and came up with a clever plan to surprise them. On the third day of the girls' captivity, the villagers, along with their leader and mentor, the people of Shawnee, decided to launch an attack and rescue them. They managed to save the girls, but unfortunately, one of the kidnappers died from their bullets during the rescue. However, the fact that they could track down the kidnappers and successfully rescue their daughters showed that they possessed impressive wilderness skills. It was another proud moment for their leader, who had quite the reputation for his unique set of skills. That wasn't the end of it, though, because in 1778, during the American Revolution, Daniel Boone faced yet another tough point in his life. The British, along with a couple of Native American tribes, including the Shawnee, decided to launch a series of attacks on American frontier settlements. One of these attacks targeted Boonesboro, putting them in a really tough spot. Though they were outnumbered and outgunned, they still managed to put up a good fight for a while. But as time went on, they started running low on supplies and ammo. Soon things got even worse when some of their own, who had been fighting alongside them, switched sides and joined the Shawnee tribe. They took off with much-needed ammo, leaving the settlers in panic. It got to the point where the settlers had no choice but to try and work out a surrender with the Shawnee leader. Some of them were even taken as prisoners and held captive for several months. Of course, Daniel Boone was in the group of captives. Despite being powerful, Boone was still considered a prisoner, so the Shawnee watched him closely. One night, he sneaked out of the village, hoping to escape unnoticed. Unfortunately for Boone, the Shawnee caught on pretty quickly. They nabbed him and brought him back to the village. Boone had to go through the gauntlet. He was stripped naked and had to run between two lines of people who smacked him with sticks as he passed by. However, he was later permitted to return to his family. Davy Crockett. Now you might think of him as the guy with the coonskin cap and rifle, a skilled hunter and wilderness guide. But there's so much more to him than that. Davy Crockett was born on August 17, 1786 in eastern Tennessee, which was part of North Carolina at the time. His parents were poor farmers, and he often had to take care of himself. By the time he was a teenager, Crockett struck out on his own and started working as a cattle driver. He would guide herds of livestock through the wilds all the way to markets in Virginia and Georgia. It didn't take long for him to gain a reputation as a skilled frontiersman and hunter. He was known for his incredible shooting skills and his ability to survive in the wilderness. Here's a crazy story that sounds like it's straight out of a movie, like The Revenant. In the fall of 1825, Crockett was out hunting in the woods near his home in Tennessee when he came across a massive black bear. He took a shot at it, but that bear was so huge that it didn't stop charging at him. It knocked him to the ground. Crockett managed to draw his knife and engaged in a hand-to-hand struggle with that bear. They fought for several minutes, and Crockett repeatedly stabbing the bear until it finally succumbed to its injury. He suffered several injuries during that encounter, including a broken leg and multiple cuts and bruises. But whether the story is true or not, the point is that Crockett was building up quite the legendary persona. Even while enjoying his stay, Crockett finally later left Congress and headed to Texas because of the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Initially, he thought that relocating Native Americans would actually benefit them, as they would be away from the influence of white settlers and given land to cultivate. Plus, he saw it as an opportunity to open up more land for white settlement and expand the United States. But as the debate over the Indian Removal Act went on, Crockett started having doubts. He received letters from his constituents expressing opposition to the removal of the Cherokee people who were living in his home state of Tennessee. This made him become a vocal opponent of the act. In a famous speech to Congress, Crockett declared that the Indian Removal Act was unjust and that the government had no right to force Native Americans from their land. Crockett strongly believed that the Cherokee people had a right to their ancestral home and should be allowed to stay. However, despite his opposition, the act was eventually passed. This led to the forced removal of thousands of Native Americans along the Trail of Tears, which understandably made Crockett very angry. So he packed up and moved to Texas, where he got involved in the Texas fight for independence from Mexico. Arriving in San Antonio in early 1836, Crockett joined a group of volunteers defending the Alamo, an old Spanish mission-turned fortress. Among his fellow defenders were some famous frontiersmen, including Jim Bowie. They faced off against the Mexican army led by General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Unfortunately, on the morning of March 6, 1836, the Mexican launched a final assault on the Alamo, and it all came crashing down. The battle lasted less than 2 hours, and everyone defending the fort lost their lives, including Crockett. However, it's not entirely clear how he met his end. While some say he died fighting as one of the last defenders, others believe he and the remaining men surrendered and were executed. Oregon Trail. The Oregon Trail came to be after the death of Davy Crockett, but he led a very controversial life. He saw himself as an 1800s freedom fighter, believing he didn't owe any allegiance to the government. In fact, he even attempted to establish his own country to prove his point. This man was John C. Fremont, a surveyor and explorer who eventually ran for president of the United States and played a significant role in shaping California's history. Fremont's life was quite unusual, much like many pioneers of his time. In 1833, he joined the Navy and became a math teacher aboard the USS Mansion. Fremont ventured westward and played a major role in mapping out the Oregon Trail. He actively promoted the trail, collaborating with Native American tribes to ensure peaceful relations between them and the now settlers traveling along the route. However, there were instances where conflicts arose between Western expeditions and Native Americans. In 1844, Fremont and his expedition forcefully took control of a Native American village near the Great Salt Lake in Utah, causing destruction and loss of life. During an expedition in 1845, they encountered a group of Klamath Indians in California, resulting in an attack on the Klamath village, causing further devastation. His stance on ending slavery became evident later in his life when he became the first presidential candidate representing the newly formed Republican Party.